I don't think the NFL would be where it is today without fantasy football. Fantasy football has made the sport more enjoyable to watch and gives people a reason to root for players who aren't necessarily on their favorite teams. So since the initial rise of fantasy sports in 1988, it only had about 500,000 active players, and this number has slowly grew over time because in 2007 the 500,000 rose to 19.4 million participants, and in 2017 we had a staggering 59.3 million people actively playing fantasy sports. And out of these 59.3 million people, about 48 million of them play fantasy football specifically. That means that 78% of the total population of people playing fantasy sports played fantasy football. So guys, this is why I want to take a deeper look into fantasy football and see how exactly it impacts the NFL when it comes to viewership and the overall growth of the league. So what really is fantasy football for the noobs out there? Now, fantasy football is a virtual game where fans draft NFL players to build their own teams. Now, you're gonna earn points for your team based on the real life player's performance, so you as a fan have to be constantly monitoring the game to see how your team is doing. This is actually one of the biggest reasons people watch football nowadays. They have their own team, they have an interest in games where they have players playing in. It's very easy nowadays to find people who are solely watching the NFL for their fantasy team, not an actual local team that they care about. But with all that now being said, I want to talk about the most interesting part of fantasy football, and that for me is the origins of where all this started. So fantasy football was invented in 1962 by Bill Winkenbach. I don't know if I'm saying it right. So Bill Winkenbach and his friends wanted a way for fans to keep engaged with the NFL when their own teams aren't doing well. And that's where they stumbled upon an idea that would get fans involved in every team in the NFL. They wanted to create a league where fans and people who watch their sport are more interested in the entire league as a whole than one specific team.
You are not a Raven. I'm not sure why you can't get that in your head.
I am. Hold on,
That is where they created the GOPPL. I don't want to get too nerdy, but that was the first fantasy league ever. So this went on throughout the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and obviously with the advent of the internet, people began to use this concept to make apps and ways for everyone to engage with football, and that's where we saw the rise in fantasy football and other fantasy sports across the nation. Okay, no more nerding out. I'm out. Okay, so this is where we're at in the video though. You know what fantasy football is, and you know a brief history of how fantasy football got invented and why it got invented. So now let's look at how it's impacting the current day NFL. Now when it comes to how fantasy football is impacting the current day NFL, I first want to look at the boost in viewership. So because fantasy football fans care about every game, this is going to incentivize them to go out there and spend more money to consume NFL content, and that in the end is going to help and benefit the NFL in terms of viewership. For a media company like the NFL, the best way to grow and make more money is to get a lot of people to tune in to your services, and that's what fantasy football does on a daily basis. People will go out of their way to watch a Jacksonville Jaguars game if they have Brian Thomas Jr. playing. Fantasy football changes the entire dynamic. It changes what is needed for a person to watch NFL football, and that is one of the biggest reasons why I think the NFL keeps promoting fantasy football and keeps encouraging more and more people to dabble into this. And another huge impact of fantasy football on the NFL is the fact that it gets fans interested in teams who have smaller markets. Teams like the Cincinnati Bengals, for example, can have a lot of people tuning in because of their stars. You can literally have players carry the viewership of your team's game because they are productive when it comes to fantasy. So at the end of the day, no matter how small a team is in the NFL, their players are going to be drafted every fantasy draft every year of every season, and that's going to get eyeballs on that team no matter what. And that obviously leads to the popularity and the increase in viewership of NFL Red Zone. A lot of NFL fans rather go out there and watch Red Zone, where you get a comprehensive view of all the best moments balance throughout the regular season without having to watch every game at once. This is huge when it comes to keeping that cohesion in the fan base. The more people that watch Red Zone, the more of your fan base understand the plight of every other team. Guys, I'm a Red Zone watcher, okay? I understand everything about every team because I know all their situations. I basically watch all their games. I mean, the NFL have it so good right now that this fantasy part of their success is the biggest reason why they will continue to grow and get more and more fans every year. It's not like the NBA where their fantasy is a little shaky and they don't support it as much. In the NFL, we have YouTubers dedicated to creating fantasy content for NFL fans, and this is the community that fantasy sort of brings to this sport that a lot of people don't talk about, but it's slowly becoming that secret pillar that the NFL stands on every season. A little intermission. We hit 4,000 subscribers. We're trying to get to 5,000 subscribers. We're chasing Brandon Pierna. I'm saying it. We're going to catch him one day. 30 years is the goal. Thank y'all, though. Let's get back to the vid. Now, let's talk about the impacts on us as fans, because that's obviously the most important thing. As a fan of the NFL, just having a fantasy team helps you want to understand a lot about the game. It helps you want to watch football a lot more. It seems like every game you watch is meaningful in its own way. We have an emotional attachment to every game almost. Maybe y'all don't take it as seriously as me, but during the season with my fantasy team, I'm extremely into it and I want to win as many games as possible. And another huge impact that this also have on fans, guys, is the fact that we watch football games differently now. I'm a Panthers fan and it's rare for me to sit there and just watch Bryce Young ball out because I know he's been balling out. I'd rather sit there and watch Red Zone. Weirdly so, it's more entertaining to me. But the fact that a majority of NFL fans rather watch the league as a whole kind of brings up this one question. Has fantasy football taken away the passion of NFL fans, where now fans only care about their own personal and individual teams instead of their city's team? That's a great question. Now, I'm honestly gonna say that it's both. I think we have to understand that fantasy football by itself isn't taking away our passion or our love for our own respective teams. It just gives us an incentive to watch other teams. So yes, we now have two teams, but that doesn't make one team lesser than the other. You can have both. And in one of the articles I read, I came across this quote that sort of said it perfectly. Fans aren't necessarily caring about their favorite teams less, rather they have a dual identity to both their professional team and their own fantasy team. So because the NFL provides their fans with this unique sort of opportunity to learn about the league and watch the league as a whole, but also follow your own team, it builds a very strong bond with the league. And this is something that's very important for growth in terms of viewership, in terms of business and everything in general. That's what the NFL has been doing perfectly, and that's how fantasy football has helped the league so much, because it bridged that gap. It fixes that disconnect between the rest of the league and your local team. It brings everyone together, guys. So in the upcoming fantasy season, when you set up your lineup, just know that you're doing something that is to the core of the NFL. Every fantasy game that you play every week means so much for this league that you love so much, because you're supporting what the NFL stands for. You're bringing every player, every team, every franchise together with your fantasy league, with your fantasy draft. And I hope I was able to add a little bit into the space and help you guys at least understand this thing that we all do every season, every NFL season. Peace out. Bye bye. Mwah.